Dreamvision 7 Radio Network welcomes Seek Reality with Roberta Grimes, heard every Monday at 11 a.m. and 11 p.m. Eastern Time. Using nearly 200 years of abundant and consistent afterlife evidence, quantum physics, consciousness research, and ancient writings, we seek to understand who and what we are, how reality works, the nature of God, and the meaning and purpose of our lives. Join Roberta weekly to better understand our one reality and gain insights into how we can make the most of the glorious eternal beings that we are.
Welcome to Seek Reality with Roberta Grimes. Joyous conversations about what the afterlife evidence and modern science combine to tell us is true about our one reality. You have nothing to fear. You are eternal and you are perfectly loved. Knowing the truth changes everything. Now, here's Roberta.
Welcome to Seek Reality. I'm Roberta Grimes, and I'm thrilled that you could be with us today because we have a very special guest. The biggest issue facing humankind today is not global warming or even atomic war. Those issues are only symptoms of the fact that nearly all of humankind still blunders through our lives, mostly clueless about who and what we really are and how everything works. When most of the world's people are freed from fear and deeply empowered by a perfect awareness that our minds are not generated by our brains, our minds are caught and captured by our brains. And in fact, our minds are part of the same base consciousness that manifests reality. This is huge. When most of us are living that perfect truth, all of humanity will be united and empowered. Then we'll be able to really pretty much fix everything. It won't even take us very long. Until very recently, most people had no clue about this, although in 1931, Max Planck, who won the 1918 Nobel Prize for being the father of quantum mechanics, said, "I regard consciousness as fundamental. I regard matter as derivative from consciousness." He said we cannot get behind consciousness. And I think that's really the most important discovery of the 20th century, even though science has ignored it. Our guest today for the second time is the wonderful Lynne McTaggart. Lynne's seminal work was The Field, The Quest for the Secret Force of the Universe. It came out in paperback in 2008. I read it together with Craig Hogan's then brand new Your Eternal Self. Those two books made it possible for me to finally put together and make sense of all the decades I had spent studying the afterlife, learning from people we used to think were dead. Suddenly I understood what they were talking about. So Lynne is one of my big heroes. Mm-hmm. Her books include, besides The Field, The Intention Experiment, The Bond, and now The Power of Eight, harnessing the miraculous energies of a small group to heal others, your life, and the world. It's now out in paperback. I urge you strongly to read it. Her books have been published in more than 30 languages. She's frequently cited for the amazing work that she continues to do, and we're going to ask her what's new. Welcome, Lynne. I'm thrilled that you're with us again.
Thank you so much, Roberta. It's great to be with you.
Now, just because some people may not have heard us talk before, I want to make sure everyone knows who you are. Tell us just a little bit about your background and how you got started in this work.
Well, it was really by accident. I and my husband started a magazine called What Doctors Don't Tell You. It started out life as a newsletter in 1989, and we both have backgrounds as investigative reporters. So we wanted to do something. We were very intrigued by a lot of the stories about medicine that demonstrated that most of what we take for granted in medicine relating to chronic illness is dangerous and unproven, basically. And there are many alternatives that work better and also have decent evidence. So we decided to start a publication about that. And it was really in the early 90s. I kept coming across very good studies. You know, I read the medical literature. We do that all the time with What Docs. And in the course of doing that, I came across some very good studies of spiritual healing, demonstrating this stuff works. And I kept thinking about that. You know, I kept thinking, well, wait a minute, if we can send a thought to someone else and have them get better, that alone
Pretty
undermines
huge.
everything. Yes, that alone undermines
Yes.
everything we think about how the world works. So that really sparked my desire to write the field. I thought, well, I wasn't really sure what I was looking for, and I thought, well, I'll just talk to some frontier scientists from prestigious universities, and maybe they can tell me why this works. And what I discovered, I thought I was going to find something like human energy fields, but what I found was that each of them had discovered a little piece of a puzzle that together fit into a completely new view of the world and
Yes.
a new view of how we work. And so that became the field, which is essentially that, we are not individuals. We are not separate. We're all part of a giant quantum field. And that
Yes.
affects a lot about how we work, how our brains work, and, and how our bodies work, and also how we work with each other, and that we're all trespassers affecting each other all the time. And from there, I was curious because there was a lot of studies and a lot of experimental work with these scientists demonstrating that thoughts are things that affect other things. And of course, the journalist in me, the skeptic in me, wanted to figure out, well, how far can we take this? Are we talking about curing cancer? What are we talking about? And so I decided to set up an intention experiment, which would be, I had lots of readers around the globe. By then, I had about 30, my books were in 30 languages, and I had lots of scientists who were good contacts. And I thought if I just put them together and have the scientists set up studies every so often, good experiments, and invited my readers from around the globe to take part and send intention, well, we'd have the biggest global laboratory in the world.
Yes.
So that's what we did. And the book is really about not only the intention experiments, not just the outcomes, but what happened to the participants. I'm talking about the Power of 8 book, but also what happened when I scaled the whole thing down to little groups of 8 and all the unforeseen things that happened.
What I think is extraordinary is that you have come at this as a skeptic purely from a scientific perspective. I've come at this as someone who believes profoundly that Jesus is right, although Christianity is totally wrong, and someone who has spent her life studying the afterlife. We could not be more different in our beginnings, and yet we are identical, as far as I can tell, in our conclusions. And I think that, to me, is the most powerful validation I can imagine of what we both are doing, because it's all true. It's all the same.
I know, exactly.
That's wonderful. So can you tell people just in a nutshell? I want them to read your books. You can't get this in a nutshell, really, people. You've got to read these books. But what have you learned about the power of shared intentions? It seems to multiply the power of our own minds.
Oh, it totally does. I mean, it does several things. Number one, it takes us to a real state of oneness. We did a big experiment. I was very lucky because I spoke in 2015 at Life University, which is the world's largest chiropractic university. And the president of the university was really intrigued by my Power of 8 group ideas. And so he said, let's test them. I'd like to put my neuroscience department at your disposal. And so I was just blown away by this. So we set up a pilot experiment where we had 7 groups of students, volunteers, and I worked with Dr. Stephanie Sullivan, a neuroscientist, and we put an EEG cap on one of the members of the group who was doing sending, not the receiver, because what we've done in most of these Power of 8 groups is it's a little healing group, and you choose one member of the group with a health challenge of some sort, or somebody outside the group, and you all send intention, the very same intention to that person. So we used the senders, and we put these EEG caps on them, and we found extraordinarily that very quickly after starting, there was a global quieting in the brains of the senders that was pretty uniform across all of the ones we did, showing just a real turning down, dialing down of all of the parts of the brain that make us feel separate, particularly a thing called the parietal lobes, which are toward the back of the head on either side, and they help us navigate through space. They say, this is me, this is not me. Well, they were turned way down. And also, the other parts that were turned way down were the parts of the brain that are involved with worry and doubt and negativity. So these were people with a brainwave signature of someone in a state of ecstatic oneness. And when we compared with the work of Dr. Andrew Newberg from the University of Pennsylvania, who'd done studies, similar types of studies of Sufi masters and Buddhist monks in ecstatic prayer, we found identical brainwave signatures.
Wow, I love that. Isn't that great?
I mean, it was just amazing, Roberta, but the big piece, of course, of it is that, it takes years to become a Sufi master or a Buddhist monk. Whereas my guys were total novices. They were just student volunteers. They hadn't even meditated. And all they had was a little video, a 12-minute video from me telling them how to do it. And nevertheless, they were transported into this total mystical state. Wow. So that was one of the big surprises. But there were so many of them. There were so many of them that were just amazing. There was, the fact that with my intention experiments, it wasn't just that we were having effects on the targets, and we've had huge effects. We've run 33 experiments to date, and 29 have shown measurable, positive, mostly significant effects. But that wasn't the interesting piece. The interesting piece was what was going on with the participants. They were having major changes in their lives. When we started running peace experiments, we've run 6 of them now, and I've run 2 of them pretty recently I'd love to tell you about.
Yes, we'll talk about those.
Yeah. So what was happening, though, is there was a weird mirror effect going on with the participants. When we were doing intention for a target and trying to lower violence and restore peace, the participants reported, and I surveyed all of them, that their lives became more peaceful. They were making up with estranged partners. They were getting along better with their coworkers and their bosses.
Wow.
They were falling in love with strangers. Half of them said they were in love with everyone they came in contact with.
This is so exciting, Lynn. What you are doing is so remarkable because you're coming at it from a different direction. But as I say, what you're learning is exactly what we're learning too. Let's talk about what's happened with the peace experiments, because I know that you were having, last time we talked a year ago when this book came out. Now it's out in paperback. What are you learning with your latest peace experiments?
Well, we did 2 big experiments since the book has come out. The first one was we decided to send intention to lower violence in the most violent area of America, which, believe it or not, is a certain neighborhood in St. Louis, Missouri. It has the most crimes, the most violence of anywhere. So we did a 6-day intention, which we broadcast over Gaia TV. And we had participants from around the globe. And then afterward, we waited 6 months after it. And the reason we waited 6 months after it to record the effects is that if you record what happens after a peace experiment, if you want to send intention to lower violence somewhere, and you just measure what happened a week after, you don't have any effect that's meaningful. It could go down, it could go up. What's important is to look at what happened well before. So 2 years before, in this case, we looked at it 3 years before of monthly violence statistics in property crime and violent crime, and then 6 months afterward. And what you want to see is whether or not your intention bucked the trend. What was the trend before and what happened afterward? And if you buck the trend, you've got something much more meaningful. So what we did was we got violence data from the St. Louis police for 3 years before for this area, which is called Fairground. That's the neighborhood and that we were targeting. And then we also looked at St. Louis as a whole. And we looked at property crime and violent crime. And we found that for St. Louis as a whole, property or violent crime continued to go up. For property crime, for St. Louis as a whole, property crime continued to go up. For Fairground, property crime continued to go up, but for violent crime, the focus of our intention in Fairground, violent crime alone dropped by 43% from the year before.
Fabulous. That's amazing.
So it was really